Public CEO Report is a podcast that provides insights about the public sector and public policy for the benefit of decision makers and leaders powering our communities. I'm your host, Ryder Todd Smith, and today we're joined by Jason Caudle, City Manager of the City of Lancaster and Executive Director of the California Choice Energy Authority, otherwise known as CalChoice. Jason, welcome to the program.
Great. I'm honored to be here. It's always a fun time when you're with RTS. Is your new reference. The infamous RTS.
The infamous RTS. Thank you. I'm trying to achieve a Ruth Bader Ginsburg level of infamy at this point. So we'll see.
Or the notorious RTS.
That's right. RTS. Exactly. All right, Jason. So despite our audio issues, let's get into it again. Tell me about how you arrived at being the city manager of the City of Lancaster.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great story. I've been the city manager for 22 years now. And I started in Kern County and was transitioned over to city government because I saw there was a better opportunity there to actually accomplish more things. And I started my career as the city manager of Tehachapi, oddly when I was 26 years old. So it's kind of an interesting story as a young city manager in my hometown, which I think was kind of unique. I spent 10 years there, tried a stint in banking for about a year, and then ended up in Lancaster. And I've been here for 12 years now, 10 as deputy city manager, and now 2 as the city manager. And I've loved every day I go to work without question. It's a phenomenal career. For those youngsters that are listening out there or those up and comers, it is a fantastic place and a profession to be involved in.
How did you manage to become a city manager at such a young age of 26?
It was dumb luck. It was one of those things. It was when I was working for the county, the current city manager that was retiring. And I told myself I could do that job. And ironically, I went to the city council and said, if you want somebody who's done this for 20 years, I'm not your guy. There's no question about it. But, it was my hometown and I love the town I live in. And I kind of said, but if you want somebody who's passionate about this community and who can do the job, I'm the guy. But if you're looking for somebody with experience, I'm not the guy. And at the end of the day, I said, I understand. If I'm not doing the job, fire me. So whatever that message was, it sold. And I had 10 really great years there that I think were very successful.
Congratulations on that, and congratulations to Tehachapi too. So they took a risk on the young buck, and you delivered apparently.
Yeah, it was a great experience, and they're still delivering well up there. So it's good.
You're still a resident up in Tehachapi?
Yeah, I still live in Tehachapi. It's my home. I have too deep a roots to leave. So.
I had the pleasure, I have my quest going around City Hall doing thumbs up, and on a trip back from a MMA NC conference in Yosemite area, I took the route through your town in Lancaster and Tehachapi, your hometown, and stopped by City Hall, had a couple photo ops and cruised around. So it was a nice little visit. So I've added Tehachapi City Hall to my list of visited city halls.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. All right. And so here you are now sitting both as the city manager in the city of Lancaster, big kind of well-recognized city up there in the high desert area. But at the same time, you're also the executive director of CalChoice. What is CalChoice, and what does that mean, being the executive director of CalChoice?
Right. CalChoice is a JPA of CCAs. And so we have currently 11 operating CCAs underneath the umbrella, the Joint Powers Authority called CalChoice. CalChoice provides specialized services to each of those cities, or to all of the cities collectively. And then there's still certain controls that the city has individually with their choice or their choice energy or their aggregation of their energy program.
So I've heard it described by some folks involved with CalChoice, and I should disclose CalChoice is a client of Tripepi Smith. We do some work with them, so we're obviously fans. But their model for CCA is different, and there's really kind of 3 basic models. There's a model that says create your own entirely and run it in-house as a division or department within the organization. A second model which says give up all your control and join a broader, bigger organization where you kind of maybe maintain some low voting rights, but you're part of 1 vote out of 45 or something, depending upon the size of the of the organization of this mass CCA that you control, and you're subject to the major decisions of that CCA. And then there's this hybrid model that represents CalChoice, which is you get to do your own thing to a large extent, but you don't have to add a bunch of staff to support the effort because it's part of a broader coalition of partnering government agencies that are delivering on the CCA work. So is that a reasonable description of those three different models?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think where it started is Lancaster was the first city to do it we called it the enterprise model, is just the standalone city doing it. So we had Marin as a traditional JPA, Sonoma as a traditional JPA, and Lancaster was the first city to do it on its own. And what we identified at that point was our staff had to learn a whole lot of things, right? Cities aren't in the energy business. So to get in the energy business, it's a much different, I guess, work set than we traditionally know. So once we learned that, we realized we only needed to learn it one time, right? Is that once you're formed, all this experience that you gained in creating this entity and now operating the entity is lost because you only need to do it one time. Once you're formed, you then become an operator. You're operating the entity, buying and selling electricity. So we started getting other cities reaching out to us saying, how can we help? What can we do? And how do we do what you did? And we found that it was very difficult to do what we did. And I think we were unique in that just because our council is very entrepreneurial. We're not risk averse. We're willing to take some of these risks. So we were unique in the marketplace, right, to make this happen. So when we visited other cities, some of that organizational inertia didn't allow that change to happen. So we created this idea saying, well, if we can do it for you, maybe it lessens some of that risk or lessens some of that cost. And then as we started partnering, we realized, well, if we can jointly operate together as a JPA, which all of us are familiar with, every city's familiar with how JPAs operate,
right? Maybe
there's a winning solution there. And instead of, if it costs you $100,000 to buy 10 megawatts of energy, it's going to cost you $100,000 to buy 100 megawatts of energy. So it became this opportunity to scale and benefit all of our members financially, but also allowed their staff not to have to learn the gyrations and learn the process that our staff learned, so that they can use that and merge those efforts. And so far, it's been very successful. We have 11 operating cities procuring on their behalf every day, regulatory affairs, and a number of different things that traditionally cities may not want to engage in.
And then there's a couple more I think are theoretically slated to come online pending some changes in the energy markets that are going on right now.
Correct. Yeah. So we've got some others that are looking at making that decision soon. The energy market, as you know, is volatile. So depending on time of launch, will have an impact in the financial viability of the program. So we're working through those issues right now.
Yeah, and I think my observation on that would be if there are entities who are choosing not to enter the market right now because of energy volatility, that's probably a healthy sign, right? That means that they're actually making decisions based upon market conditions and choosing to mitigate risk by not entering the market and choosing a better time to enter. So I'd rather organizations choose the timing on that stuff than kind of say, we'll figure it out later and take on additional risk that they don't necessarily have to. That just seems like it's wisdom to some extent.
Yeah, and in that scenario, you only have one chance to be wise, right? And it's when you start, because that's the only time you get to pick the market. Once you're in the market, well, now you're I don't want to say victim or a beneficiary of it, whichever one you want to be. Once you're in the market, you can't be wise. You just got to track the market and be wise with the operations, and lower your operational costs, increase those reserves, and do those things that are standard in the industry to mitigate that risk. Versus when you get in the market, so that it's wise to kind of hold on and see that. But the same token, you can wait too long and you've missed opportunities, right? And that's what we've seen too, is some of these cities now that are coming on board. Lancaster's been here about 6 years now, I think, around there. If we would have started 6 years later, right? If we would have said, let's wait for the optimal time, let's watch, let's the stars align and the moon align, we would have foregone a significant amount of programs and projects. The additional revenue opportunities that we've seen as a city, as well as the other benefits that we've provided other cities through our CalChoice.
Yeah. So, and let's talk about that a minute too. I mean, because Lancaster, as I've seen and working with you all and talking with you, is very entrepreneurial, right? So you were willing to take on some of those risks 6 years ago and form this CCA and get into the business and roll up your sleeves and make it happen and climb that learning curve. What like, what was the decision behind why you chose to do that as a city, and what have been some of the wins that have come out of that experience? Why was, if you look back, was it a good decision, and why?
No, it was an absolutely good decision, and I think the why is because we have a council that's entrepreneurial, and I think that's key. Is when you look at leadership structures and what we have to do, it's one, having a council that's willing to take risks, right? Which all of us not always have. Every city doesn't have that. You have to have a staff that's willing to take risks, right, and recommend risks and change. So that's that cultural relationship between the council and staff. But then you have to have a community that's willing to allow you to do that, take that risk as well,
Right.
which we've been fortunate to have. And I think there's a strategy to that, right? It doesn't happen overnight. We had a long list of successes with our current city council and our mayor that allowed us to build that level of trust. And then when we came up with crazy schemes, if we made the previous crazy scheme work, then the next crazy scheme didn't seem so crazy, right? So as we roll down these successes with crazy schemes, the community even backs it to a certain extent and expects it. So it's that relationship between the council, staff, and the community that allows this risk taking to happen. So we would notice we'd go into cities sometimes, and I went to a number of different cities, asking them or explaining to them CCA, the opportunities for CalChoice. And it was interesting to find out where those communities fit instantly, right? Is if you went to a community and there were citizens there arguing about, government taking over the electrical system, well, the likelihood of, that organizational inertia not moving was going to be pretty heavy. If you went to a community and the council, you had a vocal supporter and a council leader and a city manager that was ready to move forward, you could see those shifting winds to have those successful stories. And right now we have 11 of those under us, and then a number of different cities who are operating effectively and under the traditional JPA model, as well as some that are forming new. So it's been a huge opportunity for us. And I think there's two parts to that question: is what have we done with that, right? And I think if you look at what we've accomplished in this last 6 years, we've acquired our streetlights from Southern California Edison, retrofitted them to all LED. We've created an energy efficiency program with our businesses and customers so that a small business for free can come and get their energy retrofit, LED lights, the thermostats, all those things. A residential retrofit program where they come into their residence and retrofit. We've electrified our entire bus fleet. We've had 85 electric buses through AVTA in a partnership with Palmdale, completely electric. We have a completely electric fleet. Through a relationship with a rate setting structure with LCE. We've had a manufacturer of electric buses located here specifically because of our technology and our understanding of how electric transportation works. We've gone down the list of battery storage. We've talked about solar on people's rooftops. We're looking right now at an offset for developers that are required to be that net zero. There's a program that SMUD has been approved, and we're applying for that right now, where new housing doesn't have to have that solar on their rooftop. They can put it in the desert through a partnership with the city. So there's all these things that we can do, these tools available to us as a city that allow us to succeed. We received a $5 million grant from the CEC to build an affordable net zero housing community that we're currently just finished the RFP on that we're going to council with in the next couple of weeks. So it's these types of things that without this tool, right, without these revenues, without this resource, none of this could have happened. Zero. And then now we're talking about hydrogen, which is now our next crazy scheme. But when you look at what's next, is that we wouldn't have got to this point without having to do that.
So as a marketing PR guy, I think I want to, for your sake and mine, shift us away from crazy scheme language.
Well, hey, you'll go to places and they'll look at you like you're crazy. So I understand. We'll get away from that. Yeah.
So let's talk about this well thought out, rational approach to innovation. Tell me about the hydrogen effort that you're now implementing in Lancaster.
Right. So one thing, having the history with the energy side of it and the goals that the mayor has set from a net zero perspective, and from a California's need for 100% electrical. They're asking 100% the removal of the internal combustion engine. You go down these list of goals that I don't know that we all agree with or not, but nonetheless, they're the goal line that has been set. We can't achieve that by building solar and wind. It's just not feasible. So in looking to the future and identifying what's next, our mayor identified and our council identified hydrogen as that opportunity. Hydrogen has unique qualities, very similar to battery storage. There's an opportunity to create electricity with it. There's an opportunity to fuel transportation systems with it. There's an opportunity to store energy. There's an opportunity to use it to generate excess energy when when the solar systems are overproducing. We've heard that story. So there's these very unique traits that hydrogen possesses that in some cases are far better than traditional PV or wind resources. They can be created in a number of different ways, from biodigestion of our waste stream to waste to energy conversion. So there's a lot of ways to create this, and it's green hydrogen. There's a lot of ways to create this hydrogen that'll end up fueling our systems when the sun's not up or the wind's not blowing. And I think there's a huge opportunity there, and we're getting some traction in that.
Awesome. All right, and then in general, it sounds like energy policy has been a big priority for Lancaster for a long time. I attribute that to council priorities and staff innovation, but is there anything else that's driving that, and how's that fitting in with your overall kind of brand as a community?
Yeah, the one thing that came up, and it was an economist was speaking at an event we had here last week, and he was talking about the convergence of wind and sun, right? And as much as somebody in South Florida might want to be in the solar business, it may not be as sunny enough there because of the clouds or whatever it is, right? Or Minnesota or somewhere else. Lancaster happens, or the Antelope Valley happens to be in the heart of wind and solar nationwide. There's only a couple other places that have the kind of level of energy production that we do. And I think we would be foolish not to capitalize on that from an opportunity of economic development. No different than there's some cities that have a beach next to them, right? They'd be foolish not to take the opportunity to extract those economic development opportunities out of that beach. So we've really just transitioned this and saying, what are our natural resources as a city, and how do we, I don't want to say exploit, you're the PR guy, I don't want to say exploit those resources, but take the opportunity out of those resources and create jobs. And I think one key thing in the story of this energy is that we haven't spent any money doing it. I think there's a notion out there that somehow if you want to go green, it couldn't cost you more money. The reality is everything we've done has been a revenue opportunity for us, and created a business opportunity, or incentivized some other program, or did some other, was there some positive outcome besides just spending money?
And so let's talk a little bit about that as well, because running the operations for a number of these things requires city staff to make them happen, or contracting with or using the JPA model that you have. So Lancaster Choice Energy, or LCE, is actually part of the JPA that was formed for CalChoice, which means most of those operations are being handled or managed by the JPA, as I understand it. But at the same time, there is some net revenue as a result, or maybe some gap between cost of services and actual rate payments that allow for making public outreach campaigns, or conducting public outreach campaigns, or funding other activities, or otherwise just supporting the kind of overhead and infrastructure of managing LCE. How has that played into, say, the general fund for Lancaster, or overall cost structures for other things that you have at Lancaster, like baseball stadium or things like that?
Right. So I'll back up a little bit, talk about CalChoice a little bit. So the CCA, or the CalChoice, is the mothership, so to speak. They manage the regulatory affairs, that's legislative, that's CEC, PUC, which cities aren't traditionally involved in. They handle the procurement of the energy, which cities aren't traditionally involved in. We handle the forecasting and scheduling of energy, that's actually putting it to the grid, and the auditing and accounting for that effort, and the legal services associated with it, all those things that generally are behind the scenes kind of things that the public sees, right? They're the nerds in the back. What happens under our JPA model is the city council of the respective city manages branding and outreach, right? They're the local, right? When somebody calls to complain about them, the city hall picks up the phone. They handle rate setting and determining what the rates they want to be based on their priorities as a community. They handle the type of energy that's procured, whether they want to be 100% renewable, or they want to be, save costs to their citizens. There's a number of different ways that a council can get involved in that. But the key component is they keep the excess revenue. So there is a margin between what you buy the energy for and what you sell the energy for. And within that margin is where those individual cities get to keep that margin, and then they get to implement their programs the way they see fit. So where I talked about electric bus and I talked about LED streetlights, and go down the list of things we've done, there may be other cities who want to do an economic development program, right? They may want to do a rebate to their citizens for a lower rate. They may want to do a rooftop grant, or there's 1,000 ways that those revenues can be spent to further the goals of that city. Under our model, each one of those cities gets to determine their future as it relates to that, and they're just letting the nerds in the back, manage the stuff that in most cases, the community doesn't see, right? I mean, they don't see, procure. They just see go buy wind. We allow cities to buy local stuff if they have the local wind resources, and they can buy their individual stuff, but they can also buy collectively with everybody. So it really is a unique, flexible model, and it doesn't probably a little more risky than joining somebody else, right? And joining the big group. But at the end of the and there's probably a little more political risk because you're setting the rates, the individual councils are setting the rates. But the return is, you get zero return on the other alternative. The return here is far greater than, and the opportunities for your community are far greater than, just giving it to somebody else.
Yeah, well, risk and return as a recovering banker on your end, you're well aware of risk and return and why you have to take some risk in order to get an extra return. And obviously, Lancaster has been running that entrepreneurial model and taking those risks over a long time now. That's helped you guys innovate, to say the least. When you talk with other city managers, and I know you've spoken on the local government circuit and whatnot about this, what are some of these things that they come up like you commonly hear from other city managers that you'd easily want to just speak to here, since we're going to record this for posterity's sake? What do city managers ask you about?
Well, I think they ask about risk, right? I think it's number one. What happens? What happens if it fails? There hasn't been one to fail yet, but so I don't know what happens. But what happens if it fails, right? And that answers the question they're asking sometimes, and we ask, and I'm in this category, is if it fails, do I get fired, right? Is it, how do I explain this to a city council that may not understand it, right? Because it is something out of the ordinary. And then you have some political factions. Sometimes you got to take the Tea Party or whatever label you want to give people, is that government shouldn't be taking over private entities. If you've got some philosophical opposition to it, general, you've got some risk opposition to it for city managers who are generally conservative, who don't expect their city to, reach out there and do that. And then you have some communication issues as it relates to how do I communicate this to the public and to the council who may not understand it. And frankly, a lot of times cities just aren't ready to do it because they haven't prepped the process, right? They haven't plowed the field, from a standpoint of getting those groundworks laid so that you can move forward. And that's what I generally see, is that when we, in communicating this, is that, why all of a sudden you're going to do energy? You've never talked about energy, right? You've never talked about 100% renewable. We've never talked about the environment. And now we're going to come in with this energy thing. The cities that have been successful, I think, have done a really good job over a period of time of plowing the groundwork to say, the globe is warming and we need to do something to change that. And we're going to do it at the local level. And, they do things like, roof or solar on their, rooftops and their sewer plants. And they're inching up to that. So the next logical progression is, how do we get the community more engaged in that green energy story? And I think those are the ones that are more successful. So as it relates to getting to the level to do a CCA, it's got to start with this concept of, we're in the energy business as a city, and we believe that's part of what we do. Very similar to now that we're having this conversation about being in the health industry that we rarely talked about. It's, we're in the energy industry. We're cities. We don't do energy. Well, yeah, we do. And now it's like, we're in the cities. We don't do health. Well, yeah, we do. So we're starting to see these transitions happen in local government perspective. And I think if the sooner you start, the more likely you are to find that success later.
Yeah. Two other things I want to just dive into on CCA, and then I'd love, if you're okay with that, I'd love to talk a little bit about pandemic response and Lancaster's response on that, because you guys did some really innovative things very early on, really before the pandemic was, I think, frankly, on the minds of a lot of people, that I found very interesting. And your mayor in particular seemed to really be aggressive about wanting to get ahead of some of the pandemic issues, or at least trying anyways, as much as one could even get ahead of these things. But let's close it out a little bit on the CCA work. First, just could you provide for our audience, for those who are not particularly familiar with CCA, the nuance between the role of the CCA in acquiring power versus the ongoing relationship, say with Edison, PG&E, SDG&E, in terms of delivery or transmission of that power?
Right. So CCAs partner with the utilities, and I think early on in the process, there was a little bit adversarial relationship. I think it's grown enough to a point where we're partners in delivery of energy. In this case, for our sake, it's Southern California Edison delivers and produces the wire. Right. They maintain and deliver the wire, and they make sure that electricity gets to your house. We make sure the electricity gets to the wire. Right. So we provide the electron, they provide the wire. They do the billing, so you end up with one bill. So they partner with us on the billing. So we'll send them daily those meter reads, and then they can upload them to their bill. So it's seamless from that standpoint. As your citizen gets a bill from Southern California Edison, on that bill it has their cost for the wires, and on that bill it has the cost for the electrons. And there's been a great relationship with Edison. I mean, we have some hiccups sometimes. Just some of them are all our fault. Some of them are Edison's fault, but we end up working together to try to solve them all, and we have very little, negative interface, and it's been a very positive outcome for us, and I would say most of our cities as well. Is that that relationship still holds true?
Okay. And then the closing item, I just want to talk about this a little bit. And we've hinted at some of these things or touched on them a little bit in terms of risk management, risk avoidance, the decision-making process to get into this business. There are, as we mentioned, there's these three models that we're talking about. And cities, when they debate this, they debate those three models, and they want to look at those three models. And sometimes I've seen it's very easy for cities to say, you know what, I'm just going to opt in for the JPA and kind of hand over control and let them run the whole thing and just turn my city into a member of their JPA. That seems very risk averse. Certainly, it's the lowest risk approach. I guess maybe even the lower risk approach would not even be joining the CCA at all and just continuing on with the traditional model. But what are the kind of pros and cons of that consideration of going with that consolidated JPA versus the enterprise model that you're describing for you guys? And how should a city evaluate those choices?
Yeah. Well, I think one is doing nothing is obviously the lowest risk. Well, let me clarify. There's opportunity cost, but it's the lowest risk. Doing nothing is obviously easy, right? And we've had this conversation. Sometimes we're guilty from city government saying the less you do, the least likely you are to get unelected, or the least likely you are to get fired, right? If the more you do, the more likely the more you get outside of those edges of that box, right, the more likely you are to impact your future. So yeah, then I think the easiest way in is joining another group, right? Is joining, whether it be CPA or go down the list. There's a number of them now. That is very easy. These are smart people. These are hardworking people. They know the industry. They're successful in it. Your citizens will get great service. They'll get, in some cases, lower rates. They'll get greener energy, and there'll be programs that they offer that are fantastic. So it works, right? There's no question about that. And it's hands off for you, right? To a certain extent, you might have a board seat of maybe 15 members on the board or whatever it is. You're going to have one board seat, you're going to get engaged, but you're going to be able to, tell that story that your citizens are doing their part through this entity that you actively joined. You then have the enterprise model, which is doing it by yourself. And we've met with some cities that are looking at doing this. And frankly, they should do it by themselves, right? Because I don't want to say it's not that difficult, but you hire a few staff, a few capable people, and there's a whole lot of people out there in the industry now that are capable of doing this. The larger cities do it by themselves, right? And there's a financial cost to that. And then I think that is the most risky, but I think that middle point is this CalChoice, where you want to get engaged in a deeper level, right? You want to see the revenues returned to you. You don't necessarily want to join this big group who you may not have a relationship with, right? You might say, I'm a small town in the middle of nowhere, and I'm going to join, LA County. It's like, well, I'll get swallowed up. So you might have some of those issues. We say, I want to be part of something where my staff, I think, is capable. I'm a little more entrepreneurial. We're a little more risk-taking, and we want to see the greater benefit of that. That's really that sweet spot for the JPA. There really isn't a right or wrong. It really comes down to culture and how much, risk and entrepreneurialism you're willing to take as a city. And city managers have a great opportunity to understand that. If they say, every time I go to the council, I got a rate setting process where it's a nightmare. I'm going to do this every year now. it may not be beneficial because you can't lose money in this entity, right? So there's things like that if the rate setting becomes political, and there's so many factions in there that that we go through as city managers that we have to understand, and so it may be good for some cities, it may not be work for others.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say, for example, in that last one, is if you have a elected body who shakes in their boots every time they have to go through a sewer rate increase or a water rate increase, facing down the prospect of dealing with an electric rate increase might also be a real problem, particularly because the markets are so volatile. They can't really sit on that infrastructure for long. They got to move with the markets in terms of rates.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. And so those are challenges. I mean, you go to another JPA or the traditional JPA model, you don't have to worry about that. Somebody else is setting the rates. Right. I mean, there's engagement, but there's not, that close to home kind of effort. Right. So, there's so many intricacies between each model. There really isn't a right or wrong model. It really is. And it's not a competitive model. We're not out there saying that model doesn't work. Every city has a unique model. I think what's cool is we have this opportunity to create those unique choices for people. What's interesting is they recently, there was some news media release on this buying of long-term storage, where the number of different CCAs got together to go buy long-term storage together. That's exactly similar to what we're doing as CalChoice, right? Now you've got these other CCAs that are joining together to go buy collectively energy, which there are certain benefits in that marketplace. So, even within the traditional JPA markets, they have hybridization of their relationships.
Yeah. So it strikes me, bottom line, I mean, it's important from a governance perspective and from some of the economics that go along with it, the risk reward we talked about earlier, that any city council, city manager considering these options really kind of needs to poke at all three, figure out which of those three might make the most sense given all those factors that have been described, and then make a choice. But without kind of evaluating all those options, you might be making a pretty significant decision. I guess there's four options because the fourth option is do nothing. But you might be making a pretty significant decision without having at least mentally explored some of those pathways and knowing what those pathways are.
Right. And what's cool about that, and it's sometimes that return is going to be long term. We have this thing called PCIA, which is the exit fee. Well, over time, that exit fee goes away, right? Where it's at 25% of our cost right now, 20% of our cost now. Well, eventually it's going to be zero part of our costs. And then you see the operational effectiveness of your entity, go leaps and bounds as it relates to the amount of revenue you're generating, but as it relates to the amount of programs that you can implement. So you may be making a decision to forego those revenues today, right, to join an entity where you don't benefit from the revenues, that 10 years from now, 12 years from now, is going to be flooded with funds that you'll have no control over. So there's, there's a lot of things like that too, but sometimes we don't see past next election.
It is a challenge. It is a challenge in every legislative body of looking past the next election is a difficult thing organizationally to do. Oftentimes the staff and the I think the appropriate word, even if it comes with a pejorative to it, a bureaucracy understands the need to look past 2 years or 4 years, but that's not always possible in the scheme of things with some of the immediate demands from elected officials and the body, the people they represent, right? The body politic itself. So
absolutely.
All right. So briefly, I want to just transition real quick because we talked about this history of Lancaster being very entrepreneurial in what you do. And I certainly think that the CalChoice JPA and your early efforts, because I think you guys were the first Southern California CCA, if I recall correctly, my history on that, evidence that entrepreneurism, so and innovation, and maybe the appropriate term here is innovation. So could you talk a little bit about Lancaster's stance and some of the steps you took early on in the pandemic? And I'm really talking like January through March of 2020, right? So over a year ago at this point, in terms of your efforts to partner up with your local hospitals in the city, actually finding doctors to engage with and actually kind of deputize of sorts. Could you talk a little bit about what you guys did there? Because there's some really interesting stuff I thought about what Lancaster was up to.
Absolutely. And I think it starts from, again, our mayor and our council. We talked about this years ago, right? And we had, from our emergency operations perspective, we had looking for stores of Tamiflu and some of these other things because our mayor saw this on the horizon. He said, this is going to be a problem, right? Obviously now, in hindsight, Tamiflu didn't have any solution to this problem, but nonetheless, it was contemplated in our emergency operations plan just because our council and mayor was aware of this challenge or this process.
And just so we're clear, when we talk about this challenge and process, because I think this is particularly unique, your emergency operations plan included an element to consider a global pandemic. I guess it's redundant to say that, a pandemic as part of the concern.
Absolutely, and it was an understanding that this was a potential, and I think and you'll see it. And it was kind of funny, not funny, but we did an event in January where the mayor, and as you know, this was happening in China, early in China in January, and the mayor was speaking at this event, and we actually showed it in the year review, where he's talking to the crowd and saying, "You guys, this was going to change your life." I mean, this was in early January. This is going to change every day and every way we operate. And I think people are probably like back to the the crazy scheme, whatever. Everybody's probably thinking, "What is he talking about? Nobody's saying this."
Exactly.
And then that next council meeting, we put on 2 deputy mayors, which are doctors. One was an epidemiologist in partnership with Kaiser, and then the other was the ER doc at the hospital, as advisors, right? To understand, we had a number of different things, public health, and all these other folks that were giving us advice, but we really wanted to look locally to share that, and then also have them communicate with the public from a level of knowledge and a level of experience, where you have the head of the ER talking about the importance of staying healthy, and you've got an epidemiologist talking about how to stay healthy, right? So we had this really good partnership with those doctors and did just a whole lot of public outreach. And I mean, just constantly, and Ryder, you're part of that, is just this constant effort to communicate, and then also legislate. You got to communicate and legislate, where we required masks before anybody else. We were, buying masks before anybody else. We were, we had our emergency operations team putting together at our fairgrounds a satellite hospital. I mean, this is early March, we had this thing set up. And ironically, December, we were talking about how we're going to utilize it again. Never ended up having to, but this is the forethought, that I think we had as a community. We had a 500-bed, a satellite field hospital set up and ready to rock. We had NASA engineers. We had, the people at Edwards Air Force Base and Lockheed Martin building apparatus for the hospital for ventilators. And, we just really engaged the community in a positive way to try to get them to impact. And it was a really good story. And then even up till late, once we got up and running, then we started doing, of course, I don't think we're unique in this. The communities, from a restaurant rescue programs and loan programs and, giving out PPE and those types of things. We also joined every other city fighting the county and what they were doing as relates to our economic challenges that we were facing. So, and then most recently, which they just left today, was actually when the spike happened, our hospital was, inundated and overflowing. We partnered with Samaritan's Purse through a relationship with a local church and our mayor and the hospital, and built up a field hospital in 3 days. They was serving 70 more patients in their field hospital, basically in inflatable tents. So it was just a great synergy and process in which we all worked well together. And I don't think there's any question that was saved lives. And kind of, I don't want to say put the culminating effort on it, but at the end of the day, it was like we got through that. Now we've got these vaccinations, right? So now we work and partner with, right now, and they're going to launch the vaccination site Monday, which is a large vaccination site at our fairgrounds again, in partnership with Lancaster. And it's just now it's an effort to, same story, different, outcome, educate, legislate, and motivate, right? I had motivate. I added that one. That sounds cool. It's communicate the availability, motivate people to get it, and just let's get the economy back going again. And it's finally, I think we're all starting to see a little bit of light at the end of this tunnel. So it's an exciting time, and we prepare for emergencies. An earthquake lasts 12 seconds. That's the extent of the emergency, and then everything else is cleanup, right? This emergency has lasted a year, and it's been ups and downs and roller coasters for every city. And I like to think I don't want to say we did it better, but our staff stepped up. We did it with calm. We did it with strategy, and it was effective. We did it with great leadership and communication from the council.
Yeah, is your EOC still active?
Yeah. I mean, there was a moment that we were in there a month. I mean, for maybe a month or two, actually daily showing up to the EOC. It's still open for FEMA purposes, but we're all operating from our units. Now we're kind of putting together these like strike teams. So, it's like, okay, we need a testing center. Let's get a strike team on that testing center. We needed a vaccination center. Let's get a group of a handful of staff to work to make it happen. So we're kind of moving in these little kind of hot spots now. solving some of these problems. And if we have the restaurant issues when they closed again, let's get a team on the restaurant economic development side of it. So it wasn't the whole EOC operating in a traditional manner, but we had the emergency operations going through there.
Right. Well, I would just encourage our audience to take a gander at some of the early communications that were coming out of the city and some of your efforts. We've worked with a ton of cities on COVID comms, and they've all done what they can do within their capacity and within their kind of organizational structure and politics too. But the Lancaster, particularly like just the symbolic value, not to mention, I'm sure, the actual material value of insights that were provided by deputizing two health professionals to actually be deputy mayors and be available to staff and the council for advice and insights on what was going on throughout the entire pandemic was, I have to imagine, was immensely helpful, and was frankly just nothing. I did not see a single other organization that we had the honor to work with have that opportunity or be able to do something like that. So I thought that was very innovative.
Yeah, no, it was huge. It made a difference.
Yeah. All right. And then I want to put a bow on this. I just want to ask one other kind of follow-up from pandemic. Again, given the innovation that Lancaster represents, and you're a very forward-thinking city manager, so I'll be curious about your thoughts, and I take the risk of putting you on the spot here with this. But you've probably had many of your city hall staff working remotely over the duration of this pandemic while you're trying to provide safe distancing. I know you guys implemented some early on some pretty innovative tools for doing temperature checks at the front door and having people kind of check in to make sure that they were okay before coming into City Hall. But having said that, you guys have, I assume, a remote infrastructure right now for the most part?
Correct. Yeah, we're operating. I mean, we have some staff inside, and we kind of utilize it. Like, I come to the office every day because maybe I'm old school, but
because you're the city manager.
Yeah, the hands-on are necessary, but we do have certain personnel that are working exclusively from home today, and then some that are coming in, and obviously our field crews need to be out filling potholes. You can't do that from your living room, but yeah, it's becoming a hybrid model. And the days I do stay home, I find myself being oddly effective. So it's kind of like even challenging my brain a little bit to say, those days you can be effective from home. But I think what's going to really change, and this is kind of interesting because we have staff that, if you're doing payroll or if you're doing plan check, you're doing some of these other things, yeah, you might be able to do that from home and be completely productive and actually be an optimal setting. Is when we start recruiting the next group of people that request to not move to Lancaster.
Right.
That's going to be interesting. That's going to be an interesting story in local government. Is from a competitive marketplace perspective. We're hiring a senior engineer right now that we're, maybe having some difficulty finding one. If there's anybody listening, come on over. But is this concept that we might have the next batch of engineers or plan checkers or traffic guys or building inspectors, whatever it is, payroll, go down the list of things that are probably appropriate for being in a home setting. Say, I want the job, but I don't want to move. That's going to be interesting, and I don't know how we're going to respond as a industry. Or I don't know how we're going to respond as Lancaster. It's just kind of, it'll be a different setting, and it's kind of it's exciting, but it's also challenging. We look at education and how we're going to educate our kids, and how this thing. You look at the positives, how this comes from. I got a daughter and son in college, and both of them are excelling in spite of being online. And it's kind of like, okay, we can maybe do a little hybrid model here. We can do something different to educate. Our group. We can be a little more efficient in economic development deals instead of having to travel places. I mean, there's going to be so much out of this that I think it's going to be positive, and it's going to be challenging to all of us.
Yeah, so you went exactly where I was kind of headed. I was curious about what your take was on the future of hybrid employment arrangements or remote workforce, and how Lancaster was going to adapt to that. And you raised a great point that I hadn't thought deeply about yet, which is when the employees start kind of demanding or expecting or at least throwing out there, hey, I'm interested in applying, but I'm not going to move from Sonoma to Lancaster. So if I'm skilled, if you want me, I'm here, but you got to hire me up in Sonoma, right? Or what if they're in Oregon or they're in Minnesota, right? And they're quite skilled, but they want to stay in Minnesota. Is that a barrier to being able to put those people to work? It'll be very interesting to see those issues evolve, and I'll certainly be looking to Lancaster to see how you guys navigate through those issues as kind of an early indicator of where cities might be going in their entrepreneurial response to this new labor market we will potentially be looking at.
Well, and then you think of mobility from an economic development standpoint, and we've got Lockheed and Northrop and some of these folks here that are hiring thousands of people. I mean, literally, it changed their world a little bit too. Maybe they'll need to hire somebody in Lancaster, right? And so that impacts our economic development strategy. The other side of that is maybe there's somebody who's working in downtown LA that now can afford a house in Lancaster and work from Lancaster. So you have these interesting dynamics that we're not really sure what the impact's going to be from a personnel perspective to an economic development perspective to, go down the list. It's going to be a different future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jason, anything else you want to get off your chest? Anything exciting and new in Lancaster before we wrap this up?
No, I just, anybody listening, just, this profession, there's no greater profession on earth. And, if you're listening to Ryder stuff, trying to, learn a little bit or, get engaged or get enlightened, city management is a special, special place to be and a special career to be involved in. And you get special people like Ryder who you get to be friends with. So that's great.
Feeling mutual, Jason. Thank you very much for your innovation. We've been speaking today with Jason Caudle, the city manager of the City of Lancaster. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today's PublicCEO Report. I want to thank our staff here at PublicCEO Report for helping to pull this together, and encourage you all to subscribe to our channel and follow up for additional PublicCEO reports. Have a great day.
Thanks, Ryder.
We hope you learned something new and inspiring that'll help you in your public service. Remember, PublicCEO has a daily newsletter that is free to those who sign up at PublicCEO.com. If you have feedback, questions, or guest suggestions for PublicCEO Report, please email alex@PublicCEO.com.